Hey there, welcome to AutumnAfar, and welcome back to those of you who have joined me before. As always, any of the links that I've used as part of my research in this video are going to be linked in the description box below, and I encourage you to do your own research and form your own opinions. Today's video is going to be about some of the haunted places that I've visited. Some people believe in supernatural occurrences, and some don't. However, what many agree on is terrible, often traumatic events can leave remnants of the past behind, like a scar that most can't see. But we can still feel that something isn't quite right at these sites. If you're uncomfortable with hearing about this horrible side of history, or if you want to visit the sites before hearing what others felt and experienced, then you might want to skip this video and skim through the article first, or just skip this altogether and come back when you've gone through any of the sites you would like to see. If you are staying, don't say I didn't warn you, and maybe get some tissues because most of these are heartbreaking. The first one is probably one of the most tragic that I've had the privilege of visiting. The first one is the Dachau concentration camp, located in the town of Dachau, about an hour north of Munich. The camp was constructed on the site of an abandoned munitions factory. It was said initially to be able to house up to 5,000 people, and was described as the first concentration camp for political prisoners by Heinrich Himmler, one of the primary architects of the Holocaust. While there were over 23,000 deaths recorded at this camp alone, that number does not take into account those who died on the way there of sickness or starvation, or of sickness or starvation after liberation in 1945. Some estimates say that around 10,000 of the 30,000 housed at the camp at liberation were sick. If you thought that's where Dachau stopped working as a prison, you would be mistaken. After the war, it was used to house SS soldiers awaiting trial in 1948. It was only officially closed as a prison in 1960 and became a memorial site in 1965 with support from the Bavarian government. When I visited in April of 2013, I had read about camps, I had seen videos, I had seen documentaries, I had seen images of camps like Dachau. But being from Canada, I had only ever seen them. I had never met anyone who had been to one, either as a prisoner or as a tourist. The whole environment from the time we got off the train in Dachau to the time we got back to Munich was cold, almost unnaturally so. While I didn't see or experience anything myself, the experience stuck with me. After I got home about 2 weeks later, I was still uneasy about my visit. So I looked up other people's experiences. Much like me, almost anybody who writes about or talks about their experience feels uneasy. Some say they felt sick. A few wrote that they felt tortured, which I find almost insulting considering the events that took place. But almost everyone agrees that there is still something or someone that lives at Dachau. While I visited, I was told that the gas chambers were never used. However, that account varies depending on where you get your information. Most of those who died at Dachau were shot, starved, beaten, and possibly experimented on, or like many others, got sick, and others may have decided to end their pain and suffering themselves. And I think that's why so many feel or say they experience strange feelings like I did, hearing or even recording disembodied screams or moans. A few saying they felt something or a presence, even though they were alone. I think it has something to do with the fact that so many suffered there for such a long period of time that it has kind of just remained a place of such suffering, even all these years later. So I'm going to give the difficult, painful, absolutely tragic locations a break for a couple minutes and talk about one that is a little bit lesser known, at least outside of Canada. So the next one is Citadel Hill in Halifax, Nova Scotia. When work was completed in 1856 on the Citadel, it was already the 4th rebuild, not because of war, but because there was a lack of care, and along with that came decay. Despite that, there have been thousands of people who have lived here over the years, between its original construction when it started in 1748 and today. The location of the Citadel is fantastic. You can see for kilometers in any direction, sitting on the top of a hill near the harbor. Unlike many other places, the Citadel doesn't shy away from reports of hauntings, with they themselves saying there are somewhere around 36 known reports of apparitions of different kinds, with more being added on a regular basis. Some of the most famous include the Grey Lady, who was first seen by an employee who thought she was a tourist. When the man got up to greet her, she was gone, but she's been seen multiple times since. I actually remember her story from when I visited the Citadel with my family when I was younger. From what I remember, she was set to marry a soldier the next day, which is how people lived at the Citadel. If you weren't married to a soldier, you couldn't live there. But the night before the wedding, he got into a fight with another soldier. Apparently, the groom-to-be was already married, and he later killed himself. He was found the next morning when the carriage arrived to bring him to his wedding. There are reports that the reason she visits is to try to find him, never believing the carriage driver. And many believe that the employee who saw her first was sitting on a chair that once resided in the church she was supposed to get married in. Many say that when she passes by, the whole hall or room will smell like roses. Other figures I was told about when I visited include a man who walks around in a military uniform that no one seems to be able to identify, not matching any of the ones that have ever been worn at the Citadel, and a little girl who likes to follow around tour groups. The next one on the list might seem funny to some people, but it's actually pretty well known, at least from what I've seen. So the next one is the Hockey Hall of Fame. And I know what you're thinking, any excuse for a Canadian to talk about hockey, but this one might seem funny, but there are so many reports of the Hockey Hall of Fame being haunted, it's actually a little bit ridiculous. The current Hockey Hall of Fame is not its original location. When the museum moved to its current location, an old Bank of Montreal branch in downtown Toronto, people started seeing a woman. First seen on the 2nd floor by a harpist named Joanna Jordan in the early 1990s. She said the apparition was just staring down at her from the 2nd floor while she was playing at an event. Over the years, there have been many theories, the most popular of which is one that many thought she had seen a young teller known as Dorothy, who had sadly killed herself at the bank somewhere between 1900 and the 1960s. In 2009, it was revealed that if this is the same young woman, it would most likely be a woman by the name of Dorothy May Elliott, who was a 19-year-old teller who shot herself at the bank Wednesday, March 11th, 1953. She died 22 hours later in hospital, according to the Toronto Star. People have reported everything from disembodied screams, moans, eerie sounds. There have even been reports that she likes to open and close doors and play with the lights. Some also report hearing footsteps when working alone at night, as well as phantom touches on the leg and shoulder. There's even one story of a little boy who was visiting the Hockey Hall of Fame, screaming, "Don't you see her? Don't you see her?" describing a woman with long black hair going in and out of walls. He is one of the only people to ever see her, despite all of these reports. I would like to mention that the family of Dorothy May Elliott have objected to people seeing her as an object of fun and do not publicly speak about her. The next one is one that is right here in my hometown of Montreal and is one that I have visited countless times. Dorchester Square is loved by tourists and students. It's a really calm park that's just off the main road of St. Catherine Street, so it's a little bit out of the way but is still really close, obviously, since it's still downtown. They have trees and benches and they've got tons of squirrels running around. The recently renovated park also reportedly sits on the graves of 70,000 cholera victims. While most were dead, some were allegedly given heavy doses of opium and buried in the mass graves. And there are some who believe they come back at night to haunt the square. even though that epidemic happened in 1832. People sometimes hear prayers being mumbled, orbs floating around, and a general feeling of unease. Some remains were removed and moved to other cemeteries in the years afterward, but not all of them. I think one of the most tragic parts about Dorchester Square is that most people don't know about it, and the last time I visited, there was nothing there to tell people about the history of the square. The only thing that is an indication that it was once used as a grave site are the small crosses etched into the newly laid walkway. So we're going back to some of the really sad things, unfortunately now. So the next one is a plantation that I visited while I was in New Orleans. Oak Alley. When you first pull up to the Oak Alley plantation, you'll probably be stunned. It is absolutely beautiful, and the size of the property is mind-blowing. But the events that took place here are devastating and cruel, to put it lightly. For the most part, people feel cold spots, disembodied touches, some catch glimpses of something out of the corner of their eye, or hear voices, as well as see people in specific places, if only for a second. There have also been at least 2 instances of things moving inexplicably, one of which was a candlestick flying at a guide from across the room, and the harnesses of construction workers being strewn across the floor. One of the things that I found most horrific when I visited was how little they talked about the people who were enslaved at Oak Alley. You could ask the guides and the people who work there just about anything about the families who have lived there over the decades, and they could answer just about any of your questions. But when you asked about the people who they had working for them, the people they enslaved, there was little to no information. I've linked an article from the Huffington Post down below that articulates it way better than I could ever hope to do, and since it was written 2 years after I visited, it seems not much has changed. So continuing in Louisiana. So this last one probably has one of, if not the most complicated histories of any place still used as it was when the events took place. The Laura Lee Mansion was a literal house of horrors. According to the rumors. According to the rumors, the mistress of the house, Delphine Laura Lee, was incredibly cruel to the slaves used in her home. She did everything from chain them to the walls to perform surgery on them without any anesthetic, all of this leading to untold numbers dying in her care. Her cruelty to her slaves really took off after the constant fighting with her husband ended when he moved out. At one point, she lost all the slaves in her home after a woman rumored to be named Nina, by other accounts Leah, fell to her death and was later buried on the property in the backyard, only to be caught by authorities. Sadly, she was able to buy them back, and it was only a year later that a fire ravaged a portion of the house, which was reportedly started by a slave woman who was chained to the stove as a form of punishment, exposing starved, beaten, and tortured slaves. The people started to gather. Some reports say that 2,000 showed up, enraged at the terrible conditions, and waited for the sheriff to arrest Mrs. Laura Lee. But they never did. The people grew angrier and eventually attacked the empty home, stripping it of its valuables, and by the next morning the once stunning mansion was nearly demolished. Most of the stories you've probably heard previously about the Laura Lee Mansion are likely sensationalized. Most of the stories you've heard about the Laura Lee Mansion have not been confirmed and are possibly, likely in some cases, sensationalized, and is becoming more of an urban legend than a historical account. Though horrific abuse did happen at 1140 Royal Street, the home is now reportedly owned by an oil tycoon, and there are no tours of the interior as it is a private residence, and that's probably for the best. But many, like me, went on a tour and saw the outside of the mansion, and that was more than enough, and I needed. The death of the slave woman at the Laura Lee Mansion was in 1833. The fire that exposed the horrific treatment was in 1834. And ever since, There have been reports of people seeing figures in windows, hearing moans and screams, as well as footsteps, and most commonly negative energy for those who dare get too close to the rebuilt mansion. There are even accounts of young black girls aged 6 to 8, primary school students who lived in the home in the mid-19th century, going to teachers crying with scratches and bruises on their forearms. When asked who did that to them, the reply was always simply, "that woman." So another place that I wanted to mention is not one that I visited per se, but I actually found out about while researching for this video. The Upstairs Lounge was a gay club in New Orleans until it was destroyed by a fire that was set by a Molotov cocktail. The person who started it has never officially been identified, but 32 people died after accidentally being locked in the second floor of the club. One of the most tragic stories that I found after finding out about the Upstairs Lounge was that of George Mitchell. He had escaped to the roof with about 20 other people, but returned to try and save his boyfriend, Louis Horace Broussard, with many reports saying that they were found holding each other. Earlier I said I didn't get to visit this place, nor did I know it was even there when I visited New Orleans. And I actually remember having walked past it because it was right around the corner from the Marriott I was staying at in the French Quarter with my family. I specifically remember talking about how beautiful the fleur de lis was that hung off that building, but I never saw a sign or a placard talking about what happened there in 1973. Today, some witnesses claim to have seen black apparitions resembling charred bodies, the occasional smell of smoke in the spot where the blaze began, as well as blood-curdling screams and terrifying moans, causing some employees to refuse to step foot upstairs. Others feel an immense sense of unease if they do, which is understandable when you find out that the gates that were there the night of the fire in 1973 are still there and they still have burn marks on them. Thank you again so much for joining me today. I know this is a little bit darker than my usual videos, and I really enjoyed going in deeper into the history of places that I've visited, even if they can be tragic, sad, or creepy at times. If you have any questions about today's video or about my experience at these different places, you can drop a comment down below. You can also follow me across social media as @AutumnAfar. And remember, don't count the days, make the days count. I'll see you next time.